Everyone loves a little time off of work, a chance to relax, unwind, and recharge. In fact, we just enjoyed a 3-week summer holiday ourselves.
So in today's video, we're going to talk about how we vacation or holiday or summer or take time off to travel and how it's changed as we moved to Denmark.
Okay, so whether you call it summer holiday or summer vacation like we used to in the US, when it comes down to it, the biggest difference in our holiday time, our free time off in the United States and Denmark is the number of days that we get. In Denmark, you're going to be guaranteed by the government a minimum of 5 weeks of holiday time or vacation time. And in the US, we know it's a bit less. Now, a lot of companies will also give you an extra week or an extra 2 weeks, depending on where you work. It's maybe a labor agreement or a way to attract additional talent. And you're also able to carry quite a bit of time over. So maybe you get paid out a week or carry over a week, depending on the circumstances or what's agreed upon with your company. So there can be some people that have 7-8 weeks of holiday that they can use throughout the year.
In the US, it's different. If you're going to have that much vacation, it's usually because you're near the end of your career. And that's because in the US, you typically accrue more weeks of holiday as you get further and further in your career. And you may start out only getting a couple days or a couple weeks of holiday when you first start out in your job. And sometimes when you switch companies, they may make you go all the way back because you have to accrue time with the company itself before you can move up from 2 to 3 to 4 weeks. I mean, I know even for my dad, it was only as he got into the late parts of his career, even though he's with the same company his entire career, that he started getting 5 weeks holiday.
Yeah, and ironically, it's those employees that maybe have more responsibility and thus won't really be able to take 5 weeks off that actually get it. And when you're a bit younger, a bit more novice in your career, you only have a couple of weeks. And sure, maybe you're energetic and in your 20s and you can work that long without any time off, but it maybe isn't the best system.
No.
Another thing that can be really difficult in the US is you have something that's called PTO or personal time off. And that's where your company doesn't distinguish between vacation time or time off that you might need to take because you have to go to a funeral or you're moving homes or you just get sick. And all of it is taken from the same bank, which just means that for whatever reason, if you're not at work, it comes out of that bank. And the nice thing in Denmark is that your sick days, and depending on how understanding your company is and what their policies are, it's quite possible that if you have a death in the family or you need to move houses or things like that, that you'll probably have that time off and not have it restricted or taken out of your holiday time or your vacation time.
Another key difference is the way that we take holiday in the US versus in Denmark now. Now, in Denmark, you are, again, allowed by law to take off a 3-week summer holiday. And in fact, if you don't book it ahead of time and don't tell when you're going to take off, or you don't take that time in that May to September timeframe, you're probably going to get pulled aside and say, you're taking your holiday, right? Aren't you going to take all of your full time? And in fact, I know multiple times I've gotten emails, especially as the end of the year is coming along, saying, know how many holidays you have. You don't want to be stuck and have to take 3 weeks off at the end of the year. Spread them out. And as a manager, to make sure that your people are taking their holidays, it's not just a benefit, it's a right. And you want to make sure that everybody takes off the time that they've earned.
Yeah, and I think things are changing in the US, but the attitude is a bit the other way, where it's really looked at like, oh, I'm a workhorse and I don't take any holiday. And in fact, it's almost looked down on if you're taking more holiday than you really need to, or if you're taking, God forbid, a 2-week holiday, which most people wouldn't do unless they were, say, going on a honeymoon. And it can be, it's just a different outlook. I think one thing also that's very different is in the United States, you basically have to ask your manager for approval in most companies. And there's really no process, there's really no way to know, okay, well, I've met this requirement, I got this review on my last review, so therefore I can take a holiday, right? It's basically just up to the manager to say, no, it's a little too busy. It's very arbitrary. Yeah. And I remember times of being like, oh, I better not ask for a day off because I didn't hit my numbers. I've worked in sales a lot in the US. I didn't hit my numbers last month, so I don't know if I should really ask for time off now or maybe try to do better next month, and then I'll ask for a holiday when I have a bit of a better performance. It's just arbitrary. In Denmark, I remember having that same conversation with a manager and saying, I forgot to ask, but next month I need to take a long weekend. I need a Friday and a Monday off. And he just looked at me and said, well, I'm not off, right? I said, no. He said, well, put it in the calendar. You don't need to ask me for it. Just make sure that you'll be covered and put it in the calendar. I was like, oh.
Yeah,
Didn't know it worked that way.
That kind of autonomy is nice. And I think that's the challenge is even if you have in the US, even have a good manager who's going to be like, yeah, take your time. It's okay. Or like trust you to do stuff. It's a bit of that climate of how you feel like you're going to be away, not working as hard as the other.
Or you're letting down your team.
Or you're letting down your team. It's a different mindset around it that even if the system is positive and encourages you to take off holiday. I've luckily worked mostly for companies in the US that were like, yeah, take your time. Like it's okay. But it's this mindset, it's this cultural thing that somehow, if you're away from work, it's a bad thing.
Right, like it shows that you're a better worker if you're
right.
just by being there rather than taking the time off so that you are a better worker for the hours that you're there.
Correct. And it's funny is you can see it in some of the statistics, and you see on the screen here that America actually has a decent amount of time off that goes unused. I mean, the average person in 21 had 4.6 days that were unused. And in 2020, Americans left 33% of their days, or about 5.6 days, on the table. It's crazy that people didn't take their days. And as you see the trend, you can see this basically covers our working years since we finished university and the big spike after the Great Recession, where suddenly people felt obligated to take fewer days off, or were taking up the slack of work from people that were laid off. And suddenly people didn't take nearly as many days as they were earned.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny that people in 1978, if you look at the graph, in the United States were taking more holiday time than people even today. Although the trend is going back up, we're still not there yet. But in 1978, it wasn't that far behind Denmark, maybe only about a week less as far as average number of vacation days or holiday time taken per year.
And honestly, anecdotally, I just know from friends and colleagues, I feel like it's shifting in the US too. I've had multiple people say, oh, I'm taking a European holiday this summer, I'm taking 2 weeks off. And then I reply, well, we take 3.
Another big difference is kind of how we travel when we do take time off. One thing that was very common in the US that we did, and we did when we first came to Denmark, was to take a lot of long weekends, to take off on a Friday so that you would have a weekend in another city. We did this a lot in the US, going to, say, New Orleans to celebrate a birthday, together with a group of friends, or Atlantic City or something for the weekend. In Denmark, it's kind of weird if you only take like a Friday off, where people are like, how can you really enjoy that holiday? How can you even call that a holiday if you're just doing these little city breaks? We didn't realize it, but we kind of brought that over with us from the US, where we would take holiday in these very short periods of time. It also comes from mentioning the sick days earlier in the conversation, where a lot of people would say just call in sick on a Friday or a Monday and have that time taken out of their sick day bank. And instead of taking an actual holiday day or a vacation day, they would just say, oh, yeah, I'm not going to make it in today, I'm sick. Meanwhile, they were on a city break with their friends.
Yeah, and I think it's funny for us coming over too. I mean, initially we didn't think we were going to be in Europe as long as we've been. So my first contract was 6 months, then 2 years. So like, okay, we have 2 years to see all of Europe. So it was a city break to Budapest and Prague and Paris and all these places, because we wanted to be able to hit a whole bunch of spots before we had to go back to the US and would only get maybe 1 week or 10 days to come over to Europe once a year. Fortunately, we've stayed, and so we've been able to slow down a little bit and not be so dependent on city breaks to try to see as much as possible.
Yeah, so we do a lot more slow travel now, and that's one thing that has been a big difference, because before we would maybe do a weekend in Munich, for example, but now we'll do a 1 or 2 week road trip around Germany, and that's a much different and much more satisfying way to travel. It's also fun because we have really adopted the road trip now, and I know that's a bit more Euro, but part of the reason I think is because when we lived in the US, we were driving all the time. I mean, I had at least a 1 hour commute each way to work at the job that I had before we moved to Denmark, which meant that I was sometimes spending 2 hours, sometimes even 3 or 4 hours a day in the car. So I really didn't care about doing a road trip when I was on my free time or my vacation or holiday time. But now, since I don't drive that much, I take the train or the metro or ride my bike basically to work in Denmark, I actually kind of miss driving. And it's really nice to have road trips and be able to see the countryside, the landscape, instead of necessarily flying everywhere that I go on a vacation.
Yeah, and I think the experience of taking a holiday in Europe is different from the experience in the US. And one key part of that is that sometimes the charm of going to different places in the US is that they have some sort of charm from whatever the main immigrant base was in that country. And they have a connection back to the old world. And it's funny how you can, when you travel in Europe, you literally cross a border and enter some different culture, some different language, different everything when you go in there. But then if you go to the US, heck, you can even go to New York City and you can experience a little Italy and a Chinatown and a Koreatown and get very different experiences that have a bit of authenticity back to the old country, depending on where you are, but also have a bit Americified since it is in the States. So it's a little bit of a different cultural experience where you can get a taste of it in the US, but obviously it's not the same in Chinatown, even a place like San Francisco, as actually going to China.
We also have to point out that we haven't worked in the US in 5 years, and we do know anecdotally from talking to friends or from working for American companies or having American colleagues in the US working that things are changing, and there is a bit more demand to have that holiday time and a lot more pressure on companies. There's a very low unemployment rate in the US as well as Denmark and around the world right now. So with that worker shortage, with a lot of the baby boomer generation retiring, there's a lot of jobs to fill. And one way to compete with other companies is to increase the holiday time or the vacation time that you're giving your employees. We also see a lot of people that started their career like us in that period where the Great Recession happened and we didn't have as much vacation time, now demanding that, look, we're later in our career and we want this vacation time. And you see people that started their career in that period now taking leadership roles and shaping the development of time off policy for their companies. So there's a lot of very dynamic and rapid change in how Americans are viewing vacation and taking vacation. There's still a ways to go to catch up to where Denmark is, but I do feel positively about the direction in which things are going for our friends and family in the US.
Yeah, and with this, a trend that we've seen as well, even living in Copenhagen, is the rise of digital nomads. I think in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot more people that have come over, say from the States or elsewhere, and have that 3 months to be inside the EU and take that time to essentially live in another place while working in their job that allows them to be everywhere. So it's also blending that piece of what it's like to work and travel into kind of one common space right now. And if you want to learn more about our thoughts and how things are different between work-life balance between the US and Denmark, check out this video in front of me right here.
And if you want to see us actually traveling and come along with us as we've reached a milestone of 40 countries before we turn 40 years old, you can watch this video right here in front of me. Thanks for watching, guys.
Hi.
Hi.